Hello, my name is Marc from jazzguitarlessons.net and you're watching George Benson Untold. If I correctly recall the liner notes of a vinyl record I had as a kid, a young George Benson spent the time in the van between the tour dates with Jack McDuff, lying on top of the B3 organ, practicing relentlessly. He got the gig based on his sheer musicality and the fact that he could sing and was a showman. So as Benson told it, he couldn't play jazz when he first got in the van. But night after night on the bandstand, he learned, absorbed, and assimilated the language his bandmates were steeped in. Then he shed it on top of the organ between towns, right? So I think he may have also claimed that the cramped environment was a reason he rarely, if ever, uses his left-hand pinky finger. For some reason, this fascinated me to no end. So if George Benson doesn't even need his pinky, and he played that beautifully and virtuosically, that's a mouthful, what chance did I have, right? All this to say, there's something almost mystical about Benson's guitar playing. He's one of those rare players with that thing that almost no one else has. He's like the Robert Redford in The Natural. He's like the Roger Federer of jazz guitar, playing in a style that is superficially a traditional jazz guitar style, yet truly is state-of-the-art. He plays with an effortless swagger born of the combination of hard work and his own innate musical flair. In fact, no less a virtuoso and student of the genre is Tuck Andrus. He has dedicated considerable space to dissecting the Benson picking technique. By the way, see tuckandpaddy.com website. He considers Benson's approach to the Platonic ideal for tone, feel, and precision when picking. So even his approaches to octave, inspired by one of his heroes, Wes Montgomery's, is unique, using his thumb and forefinger and the middle finger to plug the strings. While the pick is nested in his palm, he sometimes plays some notes with his thumb a la Wes, and then before switching back, to the plectrums. That's really George Benson. Besides his impressive technical skills, Benson had a real drive to entertain audiences and didn't feel compelled to be a jazz purist, as we call it. And on playing jazz for a living, Benson has this to say in the LA Times. He said, "Life isn't all me," Benson began. "I have a family to support. I can't rob them of all the good life simply because I want to play something. I have 6 other people depending on me, right?" So whether born of pragmatism or true love of pop music, George Benson has always had a strong connection to his voice as both a pop singer and through his inimitable wordless doubling of his guitar lines, like singing, scatting at the same time. This connection is perhaps his greatest asset, and the reason his playing is so grounded in memorable and compelling melodic vocabulary. He rarely ventures into synthetic abstractions or finger tricks, right? His lines are singable. Of course, you have to be a singer to do it, but he also seemed to successfully translate some of the pop hits of the 60s to jazz in a way that some of his peers could not, simply. His versions of songs like Walk On By Bacharach and David and Sonny, Bobby Hebb, come across authentically, while versions of similar pop hits from players like Joe Pass and Howard Roberts don't hit the same mark. Pass seeming a bit square and Roberts playing in the kitschy side of the arrangement. Both have their places, of course, but Benson's versions are kind of cool, right? So now for our quickie typical Untold series. So what life and guitar lessons can we take from the example of George Benson? What example did George Benson set for us? First, have something innate to your playing that you can exploit and develop. What is that thing that is within you? That may take some self-awareness and ability to see the big picture. If your own strengths are not apparent to you yet, maybe take a lesson with someone who's never heard you play and ask them to be honest and tell you what aspects, if any, are unique about your playing. It's up to you whether these are things you would want to exaggerate or emphasize. Remember, if you could play everything that every other player does perfectly all the time, you wouldn't sound like much. You would just sound like a bunch of stuff, right? It's the holes in your playing that make us sound like who we are, for better or for worse. Secondly, be aware of your audience. So that's a big Benson thing, right? Who are you playing to? Some musicians really don't give much consideration to their audience, or audient, as in the case for sometimes jazz players, put in singular, right? But one thing is clear. George Benson wanted to be heard. His playing and choice of repertoire and arrangements reflected that. Try to develop a sense of room you're in and who's listening to you, right? If you start playing just for the musicians in the room, it can get a little indulgent. If you only play to the casual music fan, it runs the risk of being saccharine, like really cheap. Find a line and pull and stretch accordingly, of course. And 3, lastly, get killer chops. Man, I mean, George Benson was and still is a killer player. He set a standard for playing jazz guitar that is extremely high. So any aspiring jazz guitarist should do well to aim for that pinnacle and be happy even if failing hopelessly short. 1/10 of George Benson's technique is still 90% more than most players can ever achieve in their life. My name is Marc from jazzguitarlessons.net, and this has been George Benson Untold.